Welcome to Lethal Dose, your favorite toxicology-focused podcast where we delve into true crime cases involving drugs and poisons. My name is Venus Dinecko. I'm a layperson fascinated by true crime.
My name is Kayla Woods. I'm an author and toxicologist.
Let's get started.
This is Editing Room Kayla. I just wanted to pop in and let everyone know that for some reason there were audio issues with my mic for this episode. It sounded fine, to me at least, during the recording. I don't know if there was a wrong setting on Zoom, but I opened up the file and I sound like I am broadcasting from a tin can on the moon. I tried to fix it up as much as I could. Luckily, I am not the person who talks the most during this episode, but I just needed to put it out there. I do hear it. I am aware. I tried to fix it. I hope to do better in the future. So enjoy the episode. And also, we forgot to mention that it is Celiac Awareness Month this month in May. So happy, for what it's worth, Celiac Awareness Month. And we also missed a couple trigger warnings. We do talk at length about Izzy's broken leg and the medical treatment that she received, and we also do make mention of eating disorders. So listen with caution and enjoy. Oh, I forgot to ask. Are there any trigger warnings we need to put at the top of this episode?
Diarrhea. If you don't want to hear about it, you're in the wrong place.
Okay, and with that, I am so pleased to once again introduce my friend and our guest for today's episode, Izzy Beutel. Those of you who heard the microdose with Joan Beutel about Love Canal are already familiar with Izzy, but this is her first main channel episode, so welcome to the main channel, Iz.
Welcome,
All right.
welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I've known Izzy for a very long time. We met in middle school, and it was only in the last couple of years, it feels so much longer than that, that you became intimately acquainted with gluten as a poison.
That is true. That's true. It's a big part of my life now, which I didn't see coming.
I don't think any of us did. You really liked gluten.
I did. I was a really big bread person. Gluten of all forms, just excellent. Loved it. Yeah, but now I'm here and I have celiac disease.
Well, why don't you tell us about that? Start wherever you want to start with your story.
Sure. I mean, just to set the tone a little bit, to go over kind of just briefly what celiac disease is and what it isn't. Because it gets, people get it confused and it makes sense. But a lot of times people call it a gluten allergy, and celiac disease is actually not a gluten allergy. It's not a food allergy at all. So food allergies are when your immune system overreacts to, certain foods, and it thinks, this harmless substance is some kind of threat, and you get that histamine reaction that, mess up your body in various ways, either, mild or severe, life-threatening, like anaphylactic allergies.
Right.
And usually the response to that allergen is fairly immediate. So, that's that. Celiac's also not a gluten intolerance. It's not a food intolerance. So that phrase, that refers to the gastrointestinal system impacts of
like lactose intolerance.
Yeah, it's difficulty digesting certain foods. So it's really specific to the GI system. That's what's happening there. That's what's going wrong. And commonly called gluten intolerance, there's, non-celiac gluten sensitivity, which is actually also different than a food intolerance, just because it encompasses a lot more than the digestive system and shares a lot of characteristics with celiac disease, except for certain few hallmarks that really set celiac disease apart for what that condition is. So, we've got those ones. Celiac disease is actually an autoimmune disease. So
Interesting.
What
I
an
didn't know that.
autoimmune, yeah, it's most people don't, because I love talking about celiac disease, as Kale knows. People want to ask questions, I'm here for them. But so like an autoimmune disease is basically when your immune system, and it's a different part of your immune system than is involved in an allergy, but it's when your immune system reacts to something or other, because there's lots of different kinds of autoimmune diseases, and it attacks your own tissues. Your body's like, whatever's wrong, and it's like, I'm going to destroy this part of you. So in the case of celiac disease, your body is like, oh, what is this gluten stuff doing here? Better destroy the intestines. That's a big hallmark of celiac disease. So celiac disease is known for the digestive system issues primarily. So diarrhea, constipation, bloating, gas, just abdominal pain, nausea. Celiac disease can cause lactose intolerance. Also other food intolerances, but lactose intolerance is usually the first one to show up, I think, because of just what part of your intestines gets into the lactose. That's kind of the first stuff to go when celiac is involved. But celiac disease also has non-GI symptoms. Really common ones are like brain fog and fatigue, skin rashes, there's anemia, joint pain, weight loss, sometimes weight gain.
And this is just when gluten is introduced, right? Like if you are completely gluten-free, then it's not, these things don't arise.
No. So you have to be eating gluten, in fact, to be diagnosed with celiac disease, which is also a factor that comes into play with the difficulty in diagnosing people who might not have a more gluten dependent diet. So, in a perfect world, if you have celiac disease and you stop eating gluten, you're not experiencing these symptoms. You're not experiencing these risks. But we'll probably talk about the history of celiac disease, and we'll see where, figuring out what the issue was, it took a long time in the scope of human history. So, and there's a reason for that. It can be really hard to track down. There's these really common symptoms, but there are over 200 known and documented symptoms of celiac disease. And that is according to the Celiac Disease Foundation. I've also seen some places where it's closer to 300, but every person with celiac disease is going to get a different combination of these. They're going to have differently, something totally different. Not only that, but the way that your body is reacting when you're already adjusted to gluten. So the way that I started this journey at first being diagnosed is really, really different to how I react to gluten now. So it's a whole spectrum. You never know what you're going to get. And it doesn't look the same for any two people. So yeah, but celiac disease is a very unique autoimmune disease because we know what the trigger to it is. And in the case of most autoimmune diseases, I don't know if there's actually any other autoimmune disease where we can say definitively, this is causing it. Like it's definitely gluten in this case.
Tell us how you came to discover that you have celiac disease.
All right. So, gonna try to make the long story short.
You can make the long story long. It's okay. We've got time.
Yeah, we got time. We're a podcast with no time limit. So.
Yeah. Always good. That's always good. So, the story actually starts quite a few years ago now, but I will start it back just a couple of years ago where I was, frequently skating with my good buddies, Venus and Kayla. And it was all fine. You guys saw I had a decent number of spills and things, and we were all good. Wore my knee pads and my wrist guards, etc. But there was one morning, and I was on a trail skate with Kale, and we were just getting going. And I kind of lost control a bit, and I, twisted wrong, and I heard a big old crackling, snappling all the way up through my body. And then I hit the pavement on my pads, but I rolled, and the whole bottom part of my left leg was basically deflated looking. It was really fun. So we got me an ambulance, and I was in the hospital. I had to have an emergency surgery, and being there, it was like, oh wow, this injury is like so much worse than what you're describing, because they're like, oh, are you going really fast? Are you sure you're not on a motorcycle or something like that? Because the whole tibia and fibula had basically shattered in my lower left leg, and it was a very bad injury for what happened. So it seemed like just an absolute freak thing at the time, and it didn't make sense because I didn't break my leg from the fall. It was really from twisting.
Mm-hmm.
So, it was kind of just like, wow, how did this happen? That's so strange. But then, 3-4 months later, 2 surgeries later, tons of titanium in my leg, doing physical therapy for 2-3 months, most days of the week, exercising at home, doing all the stuff that I was told I should do.
Mm-hmm.
I go to the orthopedic surgeon and I get my x-rays, and they're like, oh, we can tell that you're not doing your PT because we're starting to see signs of disuse osteoporosis on your x-rays. And typically x-rays are not really where you're checking bone density. They use a DEXA scan for that. So as far as I understand, once you're seeing bone loss like that on an x-ray, it's pointing towards a more severe kind of bone loss. It's definitely not good.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, that can't be right. I am busting my ass doing PT. I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do. I'm eating like a teenager going through a growth spurt. I am starving all the time and exercising as much as I can. And there was hardly any healing of this bone. Like I should have been potentially healing a month or 2 in. Like it wouldn't have been completely done then, but would have been like significant bone growth, and it just wasn't happening. And talking to the doctors, and they're like, oh, well, you just need to exercise more. And it was like, that can't be like. And so I'm glad that I trusted my instincts, and I had a talk with Dr. Google, and because I was like, you're not telling me, you're not believing me when I'm saying I'm doing the work. And on one hand, I could have had my physical therapist, fight my doctor for my honor, but it was kind of just like, it was like, I need more answers. So I'm looking online, and I'm like, what causes a healthy person? Like at the time that this happened, I was 29 years old. And it's like, what happens to a healthy, not really middle-aged person, and they're getting bone issues. So I'm looking it up, and I see things online about malabsorption specifically. And I was like, okay, that could be it, because malabsorption, on one hand, it's characterized by your body not absorbing nutrients, and then also diarrhea, which had been a problem in my life since 2017. And I had seen doctors for it, but at the time I started going to doctors for it, I really didn't have money for a lot of testing or anything. And I was honestly really just looking for a way to get through the workday, because I was just starting my career and all this stuff. So I tried cutting some things out of my diet, but I really wasn't finding that it relied on any individual food I was eating. And it kind of just became an afterthought, like, oh, I have IBS now, I guess.
Right.
And this is life.
Which is
So
such a catch-all for every, like,
it is.
It's such a catch-all.
And normally I think, if you get that IBS diagnosis, ideally you have a lot of other things eliminated before you get to that point. But as I mentioned, it's like, we don't have the resources for that every time. And there really just didn't seem to be anything that stood out about it other than stress. Like, you stress me out, I'm going to go to the bathroom really fast, maybe multiple times in the next like hour. That's just life. And it was what it was. So I had diarrhea and bone disease, or possible like bone issues to go on. And that was really all I knew. So I got an appointment with a GI, and I was like, I need you to test me for absolutely everything under the sun that could possibly cause malabsorption. I went in there. I was like, I met my deductible and my out of pocket for the year after being hospitalized for a week after breaking my leg and all these surgeries. And I was like, hey, insurance is going to cover it. Let's do the tests. Let's do all of the tests. So fortunately, my GI was like, yeah, we can test for everything. And we kind of went down the list, like, oh, we can test for, I don't even know. I was looking at the results earlier. It was very extensive blood work. I had a lot of tests done. And there was a point when she was like, oh, do you want to test for celiac disease? And I was like, I really don't have any problems. I've never noticed, I eat bread and it's worse or anything. Like, I've never noticed anything like that. And, I was like, but I want to test for everything, absolutely everything. I need to rule it out because something is very wrong with me. Because by this point that I had gotten into the appointment, I felt like I was dying.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't even, I was starting to get to a point where I was like, I don't know how I can keep up with my exercising. I was so exhausted. I couldn't focus on anything. And I literally just felt like no matter how hard I worked, my body was quitting on me. And I didn't have any other options. So I went into that appointment pretty desperate. And I was like, I need you to tell me what's happening because nobody else believes me. So we did all of that blood work. And it was on December 26th. Somebody's birthday.
Somebody's birthday.
No. That I got a phone call from the GI and they were like, oh, hey, your blood work indicated that you might have celiac disease, but we need to do further testing to determine that. So I set another appointment with them. Oh, and I scheduled my endoscopy, because that is the gold standard of celiac diagnosis. Is usually you get the blood test, but then they do an intestinal biopsy that they do an endoscopy procedure. And based on the results of that will say, yep, this is celiac disease. So I was like, okay. So I scheduled the endo, and at that same time, I had gone to my primary care and I was like, I need you to schedule me for a DEXA scan. And there was pushback from insurance, of course, because I was too young. Like, you're 30 years old now. You just turned 30. You don't need to check your bone density. Like, why? But I insisted on it. I was like, I will pay everything out of pocket so I can have answers, because my bones continued to heal at just an obscenely slow rate. Like, by this point, I had overshot the window of like, oh, if you like have this kind of fracture, you'll heal in like this many weeks to this many months. I had gone past that by now. So I was freaking out because I still had a broken leg half a year later, and I didn't have answers. So pretty much at the same time that I got my endoscopy results back, I got my bone density scan back, and I was diagnosed with osteopenia, which is like just the slightly better situation than osteoporosis. But so I do have bone density issues. If you hear me saying bone disease in the episode, I'm specifically referring to osteopenia. But yeah, so I had that appointment, and I found out that at 30 years old, I had the skeleton of somebody 30 to 40 years older than me, despite trying to take care of myself and just generally, like, I didn't have any kind of habits that otherwise explain that. And then I got my biopsy results back, and I had villus atrophy. And so with celiac disease, the big hallmark of this condition is that in your intestines, you have villi. Am I saying that right?
I think so. That's how I was going to say it.
Okay, so. Villi. But so basically you have rows of little finger-like protrusions, very, very small fingers, covering your intestines. And so this increases the surface area of your intestines and allows you to absorb nutrients from your food. So you're digesting very thoroughly there in the small intestine, breaking down your food, and you're getting all those good nutrients. When you have celiac disease, when you've got this villus atrophy, you have blunted villi. And so instead of having nice little wavy fingers all over your intestines, you got little stumps.
Okay.
So you've got difficulty digesting food, digesting nutrients, and that can lead to a host of issues. But that's what this biopsy finds out. They go and they cut a little bit out of your intestine, and they examine it really thoroughly, and they say, yeah, you don't have any little fingers there. You got a slip and slide instead. So that was it. As soon as I got that news, I don't know, sometimes I kick myself. I didn't have a last hurrah with gluten. By the time I got diagnosed, I was like, I just need to be well again, because when you're doing this process, when you're getting diagnosed with celiac disease, you can't stop eating gluten.
Oh,
so
because they won't be able to tell?
They might not be able to tell.
Right.
In this case, with my healing so far, they would be able to tell still. But so, they have you stay on it once you get the blood test results through doing the endoscopy stuff. And that's kind of all she wrote on the diagnosis. I continue to get tested for my celiac markers in my blood, which I think we'll get into later. But that's the easy way of monitoring. That's not invasive. I don't have to get, knocked out or cameras put anywhere. We can just measure that like every couple of months. So I have had improvement. I've been gluten-free, very strictly gluten-free for 2 years and like 3 months now. So there's been improvement, but it's also a really long journey to heal.
Yeah. How are your bones doing?
My bones are, now that it's been 2 years, you can get your DEXA scan every 2 years. My bones are a little bit worse in terms of the density, just a little bit. But
they would have maybe been worse had you have not.
Almost certainly. Okay. Yeah, definitely. If I kept eating gluten, I don't even want to think about what condition I'd be in. I have a hard time believing that my leg would have even healed, because even it took a long time, and I'm still getting through a lot of the initial symptoms that I didn't realize I had with celiac disease. But once I stopped eating gluten, I did start healing, like my broken bones. They started healing quite a bit faster. It still took me about 15 months for that broken leg to fully heal.
Wow.
Fortunately, during most of that time, I could walk on it because I still have a big old titanium rod in my bones. But it took a long time, much longer than it should have. So it is what it is. That said, in my left leg, my bone density has improved since my first DEXA scan.
Fantastic.
What do you know? Actually growing bones.
Let's go.
It helps with the bone density. So that has improved some. And with my celiac blood work, if I had fully recovered by this point and I had blood work redone, or also another endoscopy, if I'm strictly gluten-free, I would have those tests come back as negative for celiac disease. Because I would be healed. And as long as I continued to stay off the gluten, we would stay that way. Like we would have normal levels of the antibodies and fully functioning intestines. That said, because of the lack of symptoms that I had when this all started, I probably have had celiac disease since, at least like 2017, 2016, maybe earlier. And I just had no idea. And I wouldn't have known without that blood test, because when I actually first went gluten-free, I felt so much worse. I felt terrible for a month. I was nauseous, and I had cold sweats and hot flashes, and I was tired and irritable. And it was like, I'm seriously having gluten withdrawals when I've just been diagnosed with celiac disease. It felt ridiculous. But had I done an elimination diet, which a lot of people might do to see if they have issues with gluten, I would have come to the conclusion that my body needed gluten to function.
Right.
Like I would have been like, wow, I feel terrible. Better put that back in.
And so this is something that just comes on at like random points in life?
It absolutely can. It can start at any point in somebody's life. Celiac disease, due to the history of it, is often kind of considered more of a childhood illness, just because historically children have been, kind of more susceptible, and people have been like, oh, there's definitely something wrong with this kid. Physicians who have studied celiac disease in history, a lot of them are focusing on these bad impacts in children, where they can be really obvious. You're supposed to be growing a lot, when you're very small. And so kids will have the failure to thrive sort of label put on them, and just all kinds of health issues that you wouldn't expect to see in children. So it's often considered to be more of a childhood illness. That said, it can come on at any time. And I don't think that I was born this way. I don't think I had celiac disease as a small child. I think it definitely came on at some point in my 20s. And what triggered it is completely unknown. It could have been literally anything. It could have been stress. I went to college. It was very stressful. Could have been that. But it's just something that happens, and it can happen to people even into their senior years. They can suddenly develop celiac disease, and it might come on with symptoms and it might come on without them. So when I was initially diagnosed, I was considered to be an asymptomatic celiac, which is kind of a misnomer. It generally refers to people who don't have easily detectable symptoms, like I eat gluten and then 2 days later I almost crap my pants, whatever, that sort of thing. Like that's the typical symptomatic response. Like I eat gluten and then usually hours to days later get sick from that. And there's that relationship that at least some people are able to establish, like I ate this and this made me sick. For the asymptomatic crowd, their symptoms are going to be like they're definitely being impacted. Just because you feel fine as a celiac eating gluten doesn't make it okay, because you don't feel your immune system
attacking
destroying
itself.
your body. Like you don't feel that. So you're going to get, more like gradual over time issues. So for me, the fact that I thought I had IBS, that was a symptom of, my intestines slowly being destroyed over the course of years. And like the bone disease that was happening for the asymptomatic crowd, bone disease is a big hallmark because of how fast celiac can impact your skeletal density. So it's, like I said earlier, there's so many different symptoms and it's a really big mixed bag. You never know what you're going to get, and it changes over time as well. So your symptoms won't necessarily be predictable.
Well, that's fun.
Yeah. So when I first got diagnosed, I did have maybe about a month and a half in, I accidentally ate something with gluten in it, just a little bit. It was totally fine. Didn't feel any kind of way about it, which was like, fortunate.
Right.
And then about a month ago, there was my first incident in some time, and I accidentally might have eaten 4 or 5 wheat crackers before I realized what I was eating. I am still sick actually from that happening. So I have full-blown symptoms now, like very obvious, noticeable symptoms. I have a lot of medications to manage them. Unfortunately, when you have celiac disease, since it's not about your body being unable to digest something, it is your immune system reacting to those gluten proteins in your body. You can't take anything for it.
You just have to treat the symptoms.
There's nothing you can do. You can't take a pill for it at this point in time. There's stuff being studied, but it's very unlikely that there's ever going to be a point in my lifetime where there would ever be a pill that says you can eat gluten now. Like what celiacs hope for is a pill that says, oh, you had just a tiny crumb of gluten and this pill will help you. Okay. That's pretty much the best we can hope for. It is what it is.
Damn.
Well, you said you studied the history of the treatment of this disease, or the discovery of this disease. So why don't you tell us about that?
I think that would be fun.
Okay.
So going way back, and this is, I don't know if I want to call it speculation. There's studies on this. I believe it was in 2008. There was archaeological evidence found, a skeleton of a young woman, maybe late teens, early 20s. And she was found with signs that strongly correlated with presentation of celiac disease. So she had very characteristic malnutrition. She had osteoporosis as a very young woman, signs of anemia. And this body was from the 1st century AD. So the earliest possible like skeletal record that we have of celiac disease is from, almost 2,000 years ago.
But that lines up with written accounts, right, from early physicians?
We do have, and I am not sure if this was the 1st or 2nd century. I think it might be a bit ambiguous, but we have Aretaeus of Cappadocia, who was a big deal medical scholar of ancient Greece, maybe not a Hippocrates, but pretty up there. But he had written records of many, many conditions that we wouldn't figure out for a long time. He had theories about what caused them, and he had just, some accounts of what they were. And he specifically is credited with the earliest description of celiac disease.
Okay.
And he described a malabsorptive diarrhea. So there's a very characteristic diarrhea with celiac disease.
Yeah.
That shows signs of things not being digested, especially fat, and, roughage. So, but he described this disorder in children. So again, like we're seeing that where kids, it's very noticeable for them. But he also said it affected the aged and women who are more likely to have celiac disease.
Interesting.
And I believe his theory was that these patients might have this malabsorptive issue because they are deficient in natural heat. So I'm not entirely sure what that meant, other than like, did he think that we steamed up our food on the inside? I don't know.
It was probably something like that.
A great mind of antiquity, but they didn't know what the fuck was going on inside us. So
it was probably a lot like, these people are sad, and so I think they're cold, and it's like they're sad because they're not digesting gluten.
No, yeah, like, and it's like maybe they have these issues because of whatever. So but he specifically described this as a celiacos disease. So that's abdominal, or like of the abdomen disease. So that's where we're getting the name of celiac from.
Okay.
Years later. It is in fact celiac disease, not celiac's disease, as some people call it. There wasn't a person named celiac. I mean, maybe there was, but they didn't come up with this name.
They didn't come up with
They didn't
disease.
find the disease. So celiac disease really is just saying you got stomach issues, which is a story of my life at this point, for sure.
And is there pretty like extensive bloating then? Because when I think like a disease of the abdomen back then, you would think there's like significant bloating associated with it.
I don't know that Areteus wrote that down. That may well have been. I 100% believe there was bloating. There was definitely bloating from my personal experience. I'm going to say it. Yeah, he was really focused on the diarrhea of it all.
Yeah.
So that's a big hallmark of celiac, but almost certainly. And there's a few other cases where it's like, oh, was this person maybe a celiac because they wrote down their health issues? But really, hundreds of years later, the next big thing for celiac disease was in 1887-88, and Dr. Samuel Gee, who was a pediatrician, so again, kids, he wrote the very first like modern medical description of celiac disease. He described chronic indigestion, diarrhea, and wasting, because with celiac disease nowadays, mortality is not a huge thing for people who have access to this diet. When people don't have access to this diet, things get really bad really fast. And like you might not die from the gluten, but what the gluten does to your body, or what it causes your body to do to itself, that can be a really big issue, especially if you're living somewhere where you don't have access to a lot of fluids and you're shooting out both ends because you just keep eating bread and you don't know what's wrong. So,
which is how people have been killed with bread. This is a true crime podcast. We will get to it.
We will get to it. Sorry, you got to sit through the preamble.
We love context.
Context's great. But yeah, so Dr. Gee, he described this wasting disease, and he was also the one who called attention to that he believed that this was based on diet, or that the treatment would be based in diet. Like he said, something about this is food. And he did experiment with various diets with his patients, but he was not in his lifetime able to identify a trigger for this. So again, many years later, 1924, Dr. Sidney Haas, a pediatrician, once again, he determined that treating children with his banana diet was very successful. And so, as you might imagine, the banana diet involved a lot of bananas, like almost exclusively bananas, and absolutely no starches of any kind. So by coincidence, this you can only eat bananas diet was gluten-free, and it did work, as much as it could work when you're only eating bananas.
Right.
So
I wonder if he didn't poison the kids with potassium because they were little celiac kids.
Right.
I mean, maybe they couldn't have absorbed all the potassium.
Right.
Who even knows? I don't know that potassium's a big vitamin deficiency issue, but that's so this banana diet is well known in celiac circles. It remained popular for a good long while.
Interesting.
After being the cure in the 20s. So he published his work on the banana diet and the success in children, and it did greatly reduce the mortality of the children in his hospital with celiac disease, like 30%, I think.
Wow.
Reduced deaths in these children. So it worked because it was gluten-free, but he didn't actually know exactly why it worked.
Right.
And unfortunately, at the time, because we don't know the mechanisms of this, we don't know the ins and outs of the disease, we just know, well, these kids are okay now. And so a lot of people thought, oh, no more symptoms, you're cured, and you can go back to a normal diet. And that belief that celiac disease is a childhood illness that you can grow out of has unfortunately persisted even 100 years later. There are people who believe that this is something that people grow out of, and sometimes these are even medical professionals.
That's crazy.
like you're just gonna have it and you'll grow up out of it. It's just one of those things. And there's no evidence for that. There's no evidence to support that you can ever not have celiac disease once you have it. And I think it makes sense to me if people question this, especially if they were diagnosed in childhood, followed a gluten-free diet, and they might not have symptoms from eating gluten as adults. However, like we said earlier, you can't feel your skeleton being dissolved,
right?
Yeah.
Or your intestines being destroyed by your immune system. The other impacts to the systems of your body can be very insidious. And if you're not eating a steady diet of gluten, you get that blood work done, you get another intestinal biopsy done, you're not going to show up as a celiac because you're healthy. Things have resolved themselves.
Right.
So that continues to be a thing where people are like, oh, maybe this kid grew out of it, and it's unfortunately that's just not the way it works.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to the history. In the 40s, Dr. Willem Dick, a Dutch pediatrician, once again, he was the one who came up with the theory that wheat was to blame for celiac disease. Wheat was the cause. And he found this out because of the bread famine in the Netherlands during World War II. So there was no bread available. And all of a sudden,
people got better.
All of the celiacs in his care stopped dying. There was no mortality after the bread was gone at the hospital.
Right.
So no food, but also this
diet.
Trigger was not happening. So it was based on his theories that other doctors later came to the conclusion that rye and barley were also to blame for this. So
it's not just wheat.
It's not just wheat. Gluten is found
that I had.
Gluten is found in wheat, rye, and barley.
Okay.
And I can talk about it later, but sometimes there's an issue with oats.
It has
different
similar
reasons.
protein. Yeah.
And just coming into contact with other grains. Oh, and in addition to rye, barley, and wheat, there's also a grain called triticale, which is I feel like it's newer, but it's probably been around for a little while. But that is a hybrid that we have genetically engineered, is my understanding. So that's a hybrid of rye and wheat, and it also contains gluten.
Shocker.
So those grains,
double duty,
bad.
Yeah.
So then in the 50s, doctors start finding these abnormalities in the small intestine. And it was Dr. Margot Scheiner in 1956 who's credited for the first biopsy that proved villus atrophy happening in a person with celiac disease. So she pioneered these techniques to get into people's bodies, pull out a little sample that they could analyze to see that the tissue was being destroyed. So that was really the point where we have endoscopic diagnosis of celiac disease. And of course, this is the 50s. So that's not going to be immediately widespread. That's not going to be known and popular and available. So, progress was still slow. In 64, scientists, I don't have a specific name, but scientists discovered anti-gliadin antibodies. So gliadin and glutenin are the proteins that make up the larger gluten protein. So they found these anti-gliadin antibodies just coming out in the body when they're reacting to gliadin proteins. So they start to be able to sort of detect this. And so anti-gliadin antibodies, they can be either type IgA or IgG. And we will come back to those terms later. In the 70s, we start to find that, we have a gene that people can have that's associated with celiac disease. Now, the presence of this gene does not mean you will have celiac disease, but if you don't have this gene, you won't have celiac disease. It's not going to happen. And now we know that there are 2 genes related to this, but this first one was HLA-DQ2. So that's associated with celiac disease and the skin condition called dermatitis herpetiformis. Later on in the 80s, we're starting to see connections between celiac disease and other autoimmune diseases, usually autoimmune diseases related to T cells attacking your body. So your lovely immune system that's supposed to protect you from things going, I'm going to mess that up. And it's you.
And then the problem.
the big one, and I think this is my final point of history, in 1997, they find out the role of the antigen tissue transglutaminase. I don't even know. I'm trying. Okay. I don't say science words. What I do say is TTG is what I've been calling it for years because I don't need to say all those letters.
No.
But the role of that in celiac disease is discovered. So this point, 1997, is where we finally get those modern, accurate blood tests for celiac. And we use mostly, especially in my case, the TTG IgA test. And so dating myself here, I was alive at this point. I was already alive when this had been discovered. So this test that helped me find out I had celiac disease did not even exist when I was born.
Right.
That's how recent this is. So when people are like, where's all this celiac coming from? Where's all this gluten issue coming from? We didn't have these tests. And nobody was going to test me for this if I didn't go into the GI being like, tell me now. Give me answers.
I demand care.
Test me everything. There wasn't really a lot of signs. So that's the big one for history. Those are my big points.
Nice. I also have a little bit of history if we want to jump into it. Because we've been talking about celiac disease and we've been talking about bread and we've talked about gluten a little bit, but we haven't really described what gluten is, and people might not know what that is. So it was it was first discovered in 1749. So we've had bread for a very long time because of everything we were doing with agriculture and people in 1 or 2 AD who were suffering from this shit. But we didn't find what gluten was until 1745. And of course it took until the 1880s to kind of pinpoint that it was in the diet. But what gluten is when you take wheat flour and you wash it, or that is you put it, like you make a dough with it and then you literally wash the dough. You like run water over it again and again and again. This is how you make seitan, which is a vegan protein, because you're washing away a water-soluble sugar starch and you're left over with the protein of bread, which is gluten. Yes.
Okay.
And gluten is the reason that kneaded bread holds in carbon dioxide so it becomes light during baking, and why wheat dough that is like kneaded can stay together and be manipulated rather than crumbling, which I'm sure Izzy is super familiar with.
Oh, it's true. It's true.
So yeah, gluten is the protein in bread.
Okay.
As she says, in our bodies, when we eat it, it breaks down into the peptides gliadins, which is a class of peptide, and glutenins, which is another class. And rye and barley, they have similar classes of proteins. And these proteins don't get broken down any further by human enzymes because they have high concentrations of proline. And I don't know why that is because I'm not a biochemist, so we're just going to leave it at that.
That's valid.
But in most people, this isn't a big deal. These partially digested peptides, they cross our intestinal epithelial barrier, which is just to say they get picked up by those villi. They enter the blood. They're in our blood for a while. They're excreted probably through our kidneys and our urine. They don't do any damage. But if you are unlucky enough to be in that Venn diagram of people who has those two genes, like Izzy is, then you end up with that T cell response. And there's only about 40% of people who have the HLA-DQ2 or the DQ8 genotypes, and 2 to 3% of those people develop celiac disease because they have the TTG2, right? And so overall, this is 1% of the Western population. It's a very small percent of people. But it is this response, like Izzy said, this response to the gliadin being partially digested, and then it creates this peptide HLA complex that creates these antibodies that shows up in the blood. So it's this response to it, which is why I think it's really interesting that Izzy still sees this months and months and months after the last time she ate gluten, that you still have these like peptides in your blood. That's crazy. This T cell response is what results in those GI effects that are so characteristic of celiac disease, because this is like the T cell response causes the inflammation that attacks your intestines, and then that can get out into your body and then work on your immune system and do other crazy shit.
Wreak havoc.
Yeah. And so of all of the different sensitivities and autoimmune responses and shit that can happen as a result of ingesting gluten, celiac is definitely the rarest reaction. Only 3% of people have wheat allergies, which again are antibody mediated. It's still to gliadin, but it's an antibody response. And then 13% of people have that non-celiac gluten sensitivity that has all the celiac shit, but when you test the blood, there's nothing there.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so they don't have that same immune response, and they don't have that villus atrophy occurring in their intestines. And that's the really big differentiator between NCGS and celiac disease.
Okay. Interesting.
Just to kind of emphasize the autoimmune disease aspect and the fact that although when you see a doctor for this, if you go to like an autoimmune disease specialist, most times they will send you to a GI doctor because they have just kind of been tossed this condition because it's so well known for affecting the digestive system.
Gotcha.
But it actually does quite a bit more. So, you know, obviously in my case, we see it affecting skeleton, your bone density gets compromised. It's also strongly associated with reproductive system issues. So infertility is a really big one. That's another way, in addition to bone disease, that people will find out they have celiac disease when they don't have other symptoms. When people can't get pregnant, can't stay pregnant, just having otherwise complications, sometimes they find out they had celiac disease. So it can affect your reproductive system. There's, you know, neurological problems, which I do unfortunately experience. So fatigue, headache, muscle weakness, peripheral neuropathy is a big one. So I at this point, I know when I have eaten gluten because I will not be able to feel anything like below my elbows or below my knees. And it will like, it tingles, it stings, it goes numb,
like
and
they're falling asleep.
yeah. And it doesn't really matter what I do because I can't shake that off. Yeah. So this most recent glutening, I did have neuropathy probably for about 2 weeks intermittently. And that was not fun. It was not a good time.
Yeah.
And that's the thing too, about even a small amount of gluten is it can last a very long time, which I think drives home the fact that this isn't a GI issue because you're not still digesting your gluten.
Right.
Weeks later, a month later, it's done, it's gone, it's over. So you have those sorts of things. We also have psychological symptoms. So depression, anxiety, sometimes even more serious conditions. And people will say, you know, these resolved after I stopped eating gluten, which sounds batshit. But if you have celiac disease, it is batshit. And then, you know, we've got, you know, blood. You can have iron or vitamin D, calcium deficiencies, that you'll
Which
find
makes
in your
sense.
blood. You
Yeah.
might have, you know, again, fatigue coming from there, especially if you've got anemia, which is a common symptom as well. And then we do have some increased cancer risk, you know, if you're being exposed to these things. And unfortunately, these impacts aren't just necessarily like you've been eating a lot of gluten. It might be you are eating only a small amount of gluten, because for celiacs, it only needs to be a crumb. Like that is enough to set off the full immune response and cause intestinal damage. So it is like 1/350th of a piece of a regular sized piece of bread. That is enough to set off celiac disease response. So it's really a very small amount. It's undetectable to the human eye. That can be enough to set it off. And repeated exposures, you're really just like digging your own grave here, because like each instance of it being set off, that can last for months, even after you stop feeling it. So like we mentioned, I'm still having a pretty high response to gluten, and I have after I mean, even before that, my blood work prior to the cracker episode, it was still really elevated. And even after the cracker situation, it hasn't gotten a whole lot worse, but it also was not in great shape, even after 2 years of being very strictly gluten-free.
That's crazy.
Right.
Like I have not healed yet. And realistically, I might never. Like there's no guarantees with this. So it's definitely something to take seriously and not rely on the fact that you might heal from the damage if you stay on this strict gluten-free diet.
Well, and that's why it's so crazy that like you have to keep eating gluten like ahead of the test.
Yes. So that is also a reason why there are a number of people who might have been diagnosed with, or would at least identify as maybe, you know, somebody with NCGS or just gluten intolerance, because if you suspect an issue with gluten and you stop eating it and it was gluten, you're not going to start it back up again. You're not going to undergo what is actually called the gluten challenge, where physicians recommend that you eat at least like one slice of bread every day for, it depends on the physician, but it's usually 1 to 2 months that you are expected to eat gluten every day and be extremely, extremely sick in order to have like definite results. Like you definitely have celiac disease or you definitely don't. So once you stop eating gluten, it's really hard to get diagnosed. Like if you do have an issue with gluten. So a lot of people with NCGS might also just be people who are unwilling to put themselves through that torture, which is very understandable. So I will say, anybody listening to this, if you think you might have a gluten issue, or if you know somebody who does, get the blood test first. Just try to get the blood test first, because once you skip past that, it's real hard going back. I don't think I would eat gluten again at this point for a test. I don't think I could do it. It would be bad. It would be very bad.
For sure.
But let's get into some of these cases. I could keep going with more facts and stuff, but let's see what we've got in the terrible news of gluten poisoning.
In February 2016, Jennifer Harris-Hopkins began serving a 4-year prison sentence at the New Mexico Women's Correctional Facility for unlawful taking of a motor vehicle. The day after she arrived, she informed medical staff that she had celiac disease, which requires routine care and, at the bare minimum, a gluten-free diet. She received neither, and only 2 days after her sentence began, she was transferred to Cibola General Hospital for emergency medical treatment. She was discharged the same day with a diagnosis of asthma with acute exacerbation, which I think you can have asthma be a symptom of celiac exposure, I think. A week later, in early March, Harris-Hopkins filed a request to receive medications to help with nausea, diarrhea, and vomiting. Later that month, she put in another written request for medical attention, in which she reported anal bleeding, double vision, and intense stomach pain. So she's still not receiving the care that she needs.
Or the diet.
Or the diet.
Yeah.
She visited a prison nurse in April, who afterwards wrote in Harris-Hopkins' files that she alleged that she had celiac disease. Later that month, another nurse wrote that Harris-Hopkins' stomach was so bloated that she looked 30 or 40 weeks pregnant. In July, she filed a grievance with the state corrections department, which read, "I am malnutritioned and vitamin deficient. The items above can kill me. Help me." After she submitted this, she returned to Cibola General Hospital once again for emergency care, and this time was hospitalized for 3 days. The attending physician there concluded, quote, "It is possible that this lady does suffer from celiac disease and that she might be better served by the attention of a gastroenterologist in the future," unquote. 2 months later, on September 7th, 2016, her condition became critical, but she wasn't taken back to the hospital. Rather, she was transferred to the Central New Mexico Correctional Facility over an hour away. Upon arrival there, the staff saw what poor condition she was in and immediately transferred her to the University of New Mexico Hospital for care. But unfortunately, medical staff were unable to save her, and Jennifer Harris-Hopkins died that same day at the age of 38. A subsequent autopsy revealed that she was, in fact, suffering from profound malnutrition before her death and lost 34 pounds while in custody. Harris-Hopkins, her mother, and other inmates warned the corrections department about Jennifer's declining health leading up to her death, and her mother took the corrections department, their health care, and Cibola General to court. In 2018, the prison health provider, Centurion, settled for $280,000, and the state settled the wrongful death suit for $200,000 in 2023. But Jennifer Harris-Hopkins is not the only person to suffer from poor medical care as a celiac in prison, which is a fact I doubt surprises anyone who has listened to this show before. Daniel Phoenix filed a lawsuit against the chief medical director and a doctor at the Dillwyn Correctional Center in Virginia in 2018. Phoenix saw Dr. Ojai several times a week during his incarceration with complaints of abdominal and gastric symptoms due to his celiac disease. Ojai advised Phoenix to avoid gluten items in the commissary and gave a diet order to the food service people, but the Virginia Department of Corrections does not have a specific gluten-free diet to feed to prisoners. Over the next month after this diet order was given, Phoenix returned to Ojai several times for sharp abdominal pain and vomiting blood. Phoenix was sent to the ER and returned with discharge instructions stating he required a strict gluten-free diet, but less than a week afterward, Ojai discontinued the diet order because he heard that Phoenix was getting foods with gluten in them from the commissary, and so he was starting to doubt that Phoenix even had celiac disease. Phoenix was then tested for a bunch of stuff, including celiac disease, which came back positive, but Ojai refused to instate the diet order, which was made repeatedly over the next 2 months. Eventually, another nurse filed the diet order for Ojai, but because of Phoenix's poor treatment, he decided to file a lawsuit against Ojai, which ended up in a legal battle with the courts. So now it's focused on, am I, able to file a lawsuit? They were looking at if Phoenix even had a case based on the 8th Amendment. So we're back to the cruel and unusual punishment.
Mm-hmm. This is crazy.
Which it is. It's definitely cruel. And, this absolutely. Is torture.
Well, and he was saying that it wasn't just cruel and unusual. He was saying it was deliberate indifference, which also falls under the cruel and unusual punishment.
I mean, they know, and they are deliberately ignoring his needs.
Well, they were arguing that he needed an expert witness to testify about treatment for celiac disease. But that was deemed improper in the Fourth Circuit, and his lawsuit was reinstated because they decided that you don't need expert testimony to argue deliberate indifference. So after that whole shit show in the courts, as of March 2024, the case still sits open. The lawsuit is still open. Phoenix has been transferred to the St. Bride's Correctional Center. Hopefully he's receiving proper medical treatment there, but we don't know because there hasn't been a precedent set that you can't be deliberately indifferent to a prisoner. And, Jennifer Harris-Hopkins has already died in custody.
Yeah.
So
that's tragic.
Yeah. And I mean, it just sucks that people think that because these blood tests have only been around for so long and gluten-free is suddenly a trend, that they think that it's not this thing that you can literally die from. People take it so unseriously.
People, it's true. I mean, outside of these situations where I'm not really in other people's care, people are very indifferent about this. I've had people who I have explained celiac disease to be like, oh, do you want to risk it? And offer me gluten containing food. Or people act like, if I'm like, oh, I can't eat at this restaurant, what if we ate at this one instead where they could accommodate me? I'm high maintenance, I'm overbearing, it's too much. And so in these situations when somebody is subjected to being under the care of other individuals with no other choice, I think there's probably hundreds or thousands of these cases that would never see the light of day.
Yeah.
Like we would never hear about them because, they can just withhold your food. And there's so many ways it could be made unsafe, even if they were getting a gluten-free diet.
Yeah.
Like there could be cross contact with other things in the cafeteria that would still upset them. But Jennifer Harris-Hopkins that's a case where I think it really demonstrates how extreme celiac can be. Like even with the symptoms that I get, I'm still a very mild celiac in terms of symptoms. Like this can really destroy people very quickly. And in prison, especially if they're transferring you around because you're difficult, it's like you either can not eat or you can eat food that kills you.
Right.
And that you're not going to absorb anyway, so it's like you're not eating.
There's not a good option. And people will be like, oh, well, it doesn't kill you right away, so you're fine.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
No,
well,
her death was completely avoidable.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, she was in the position where she knew that she was celiac and knew that she needed a gluten-free diet.
And told them right away.
Yeah.
She told them right away, and they still just didn't care.
Yeah.
It's very devastating to see somebody who, even, doing your best, advocating for yourself, demonstrating your case, where there's all of this evidence saying something is very wrong. Right. And the people in charge of caring for you just don't
care for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we've kind of had a theme this season about the incarceration system and all of that, the justice system. But, like, she didn't deserve to die in custody because of unlawful taking of a motor vehicle. Like,
no.
She committed a crime. She was serving time. She did not deserve to die for that and be treated that poorly. I mean, in terms of people not believing what celiac is and not understanding that it's poison, but only for some people, I did look into some other sources of misinformation, if we would like to dive into that.
Sure.
I borrowed some books from my local library that had authors with MD at the end of their name and decided to see what bullshit is being offered.
I've never had the strength to read these books.
The first one I looked at was Wheat Belly by William Davis, MD. Have you heard of this one, Venus?
Mm-mm.
Oh, it's such bullshit.
It's very popular.
Oh, really?
A number of years. It was very popular for a while.
It was.
It was tabloids loved it.
It was published in 2011 and starts off strong with a health and wellness myth in the very first line, which is, flip through your parents' or grandparents' family albums and you're likely to be struck by how thin everyone looks. Not mine, personally. I got chunky people in my family.
Yeah.
But so Davis starts his story by explaining how he cured his own diabetes by cutting wheat from his diet, and that he's a cardiologist, so he was seeing people in his practice, and he decided to have his patients with diabetes cut wheat from their diet, and they were experiencing immediate results, and their symptoms returned when they went back to eating wheat, so there must be something in the wheat. But I mean, he just starts out misleading because he doesn't just recommend cutting out wheat. He wants people to cut out carbs. It's a sugar thing.
Oh.
And
yeah. It's like Atkins, like,
yes.
vibes.
Or paleo. Yeah. There's strong paleo vibes in both the books I read. And he doesn't provide numbers with his patients, right? He just gives this anecdotal evidence. He's like, oh, they were so good. But he doesn't...
Things got better.
Yeah.
It's like, was that like 2 people, my guy?
Right? Right? Are you just remembering the ones that it worked out for?
Right.
But he claims that exposure to wheat, it doesn't just cause celiac disease, which everyone agrees it causes celiac, but it also, according to him, causes autism, diabetes, heart diseases, schizophrenia, and of course obesity. Yes.
Wow.
And he believes this is because of genetic modifications that humans have made to wheat. So way back when, in the caveman times, wheat was fine. But also during our grandparents' era, the wheat was fine.
Fine.
Which is like, that's not how natural selection and natural breeding of plants works.
Right. And history, like historical record begs to differ on that. Like we have it documented.
Wow.
Right.
In various places.
And he does talk about gluten. He is like, no, all of bread is a poison. Sugar's bad for you and it's the devil, but gluten's also bad for you. But he argues that the different kinds of glutens that exist, because there are different kinds. I mean, it's a protein and the peptides are their own family. So you get these like different DNAs in glutens. So there are technically different glutens. But he argues that the different glutens that exist because of genetic modification, big air quotes, is what makes people sick, even though it's just gliadin. And it's just a response to the gliadin peptide family. And also he's like deliberately misusing the whole GMO thing and hopping on that.
Right.
Because everybody's afraid of GMOs, but it's like, okay, if you're going to argue that the wheat that we've just naturally selected so that it grows bigger and it grows faster and whatever is a GMO, then kale and broccoli are GMOs because that's the same fucking plant and we just bred it to do different things.
Right. Like, hello?
Yeah.
I will say, I'm not shy about saying I have celiac disease in real life. Some people don't want to give that sort of information out, but if food comes up and people say anything, like, I'm not just going to be like, I'm gluten-free. I'll probably also be like, I have celiac disease because
that's important.
Like, I feel like it's important to educate people if they're open to being educated. And also I just don't, I don't want to hide that. Like, I feel like, I'm not saying that people who hide the fact they have celiac disease are like ashamed of it or whatever, but like for me, I would feel like I'm being like shameful or like I'm acting like it's something to be ashamed of. And it's like, yeah, it makes me difficult.
You're not difficult.
Like if somebody's serving me food or whatever, but it's like, I'm not shy about it. But when I say that, that is one big myth that I've heard, that people are like, oh, celiac disease is so common now because of all of the GMO wheat. And they say this stuff like people really love to come at me with their favorite myths, but that is a very popular one. And that's also why there is a persistent myth that it's okay to eat bread in Europe because they have less GMO. And it's like, so my darling, gluten is gluten.
Yeah.
Celiacs exist in Europe.
When I worked at a restaurant
all over,
we had a gluten-free menu. We had one gluten-free salad dressing, right? And so many people wanted the wasabi dressing. And we would tell them it's not gluten-free because they would tell you up front, like, I'm gluten-free. Okay, well, here's our gluten-free diet. These are your choices. And I'll let the kitchen know that you're gluten-free so that we can take all of the precautions, right? And they go, no, I'm going to have the wasabi dressing. And I'm like, okay, so is this a choice? Or is it an allergy? Like, is this a medical situation, or do you just not like gluten because of whatever you think? And very quickly, so many people say it's a choice because they want the fucking wasabi dressing. Like, well, it was so crazy to me that they would like. And we did have somebody at our restaurant who had celiac, who like, the kitchen would joke like, "Would you test this for us, Julia?" Like. Yeah, and she, like, I told, like, them that that's not funny and not a joke, like, but I don't know. I just think it's so, like, so many people take it for, I don't want to say take it for granted, but don't take it seriously.
They don't take it seriously.
And there are various reasons for that, too, which I think leads to a lot of confusion for people without celiac disease. I definitely think for the purposes of food preparation, the concept of celiac as an allergy is helpful because most people are familiar with allergen and cross contact between food. Spreading the allergen is a risk. So I think that's very helpful in that. But definitely people do things that are confusing. Like some people will insist on a gluten-free meal and then drink a normal beer.
Right. Like, and that would happen all the time too.
I've seen it too in restaurants. Or, you know, there's just kind of things. And in some cases, that might be somebody who has like a gluten sensitivity or an intolerance and they just want to risk it. And in some cases I've seen online people who are like, oh, I have celiac disease, but it's too difficult and I can't keep up with it. So I give myself a treat every once in a while. And that also confuses people because then, you know, people come to me and they're like, oh, do you ever have a cheat day? Right. I do not.
Yeah.
I don't. No. Like,
yeah.
It's not worth it, but it can be very confusing what people tolerate. And like for a celiac, gluten-free is gluten-free. If you're eating safely, like it is no contact with a surface that has had gluten on it. Like you can't share a toaster. That's just not advisable. I mean, if it was a really clean toaster, maybe, but how often do people fish out their crumbs?
I have tried to clean a toaster, and it is so hard to clean a toaster.
There's a lot of little wires.
I don't
up in
clean
there.
No, I don't know that that's like I've like pulled out the bottom tray.
Yeah, like you shake
I've
the
done
crumbs,
that.
like
shake the crumbs out, but like cleaning a toaster, that's not a thing.
No, so you know, it's like. And like if you were walking around holding a loaf of bread and then I was like, oh, can you give me that gluten-free bread there? And you just turned and were like, here you go the same hands. I would not eat that bread now. I would not eat that bread.
Yeah.
Because like for me, especially at the point that I'm at, the fact that I haven't recovered since my initial diagnosis, it's like totally not worth it. Not worth it at all. So I hear a lot of myths and I hear people confused, and for the most part, people are willing to listen a bit. I think a lot of things don't sink in because people just hear these popular myths. They hear things like, "Oh, it's a GMO thing. We've supercharged the wheat to the extent that it's bad for everyone."
Deadly.
And it's like it's not. It's not.
It's not bad for everyone.
Gluten
and that's what this guy is arguing. He's like, no, actually, everybody, you know, has like some sort of sensitivity. Like he makes it sound like a spectrum, and I think that's what people take away, which is why they're like, it can't be all or nothing for you. Like it has to be a spectrum. And I will say his comments conflict with actual researchers in the field. He has no research papers.
No. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, if he's saying that it causes autism and schizophrenia and things like that, like there's no way that he has research that shows that. I'm sorry.
But that's just his personal opinion is that it causes autism. Right. He throws that into a book with an MD attached to his name.
Right.
And people think that
and people believe it.
Yeah.
Because people... Never mind.
Yeah.
I can't say his name because I blocked him immediately, but there was some kind of doctor. I think he might have been a chiropractor. But there was some kind of doctor that came across my Instagram. And it was this whole thing where he was like, you can eat sourdough if you have celiac disease because the grains are fermented, which no, the entire sourdough loaf is not fermented. That's not how that works. Fermented gluten is actually still gluten. So
it doesn't deglutenify it.
It does not, in fact. So if a grain has been fermented, even if it's been strained out, like in beer, still has gluten. We got gluten in there. Like that's not how it works.
It doesn't denature the proteins, y'all.
No. And you know, that's the kind of stuff where I'm like, man, you're lying and you're doing it in a very dangerous way. And there's people who are like, I'm a celiac and I eat sourdough bread every day. And it's like, enjoy your bone disease.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're soon to becoming chronic diarrhea. Because if you feel fine, it's not going to last.
Yeah.
I had that. I felt okay, at least for a while. And things just kept going downhill.
Yeah.
So that... Plenty of myths. What else do you got?
Well, Davis also says that the effects of wheat may act on our opioid receptors, which has been shown in vitro studies and by feeding animals directly the peptides of interest, not actual wheat bread. It hasn't been linked to eating actual wheat. There is some signs in these in vitro studies of an exogenous opioid response, meaning that something inside of you links to your opioids. But it's not like a heroin high. It's like a runner's high. And anybody who has eaten bread, which is most of us, knows that eating bread doesn't make you get, like, it doesn't give you a runner's high.
It's a bread high? Like, hello?
Yeah.
This is your brain on bread. Oh, I love it. I love it. Bread addict.
Yeah. I found one article that debunked Davis by saying that his statements were diametrically opposite to the observations of consumption of whole grain and whole grain fiber, which they prove that it's good for your blood glucose and improves your cholesterol levels, right? These whole grains are good for you if you aren't a celiac, if you don't have a wheat sensitivity. And he's just mixing and matching what he wants to say. He's actually bold enough to have a section on celiac disease, and he calls IBS celiac disease light.
What? No, that's not a thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I remember this book being very popular.
It was extremely popular. Yes.
Well, people were really excited about it, and it's so harmful.
That's probably why so many people who came into the restaurant, because like it was a thing. It was a thing. Like
there's definitely a fad element. It was trying out the gluten-free diet.
Yes,
people like to tell me about it too. Like when I am like I have celiac disease, they'll be like, "Oh, I've been reducing my gluten lately. Like, it's so bad for you." And like they think I'm gonna be like, "Yeah, it's so bad for you." Like eat your.
You're like, no, bread. It's bad for me.
Like it's bad for me. Like it's bad for people with a condition. And I'm like, oh, does it give you a rash or hives or bloating? Like, do you feel okay? And then they're like, oh no, I just think, like it's so bad for you. And it's like, no, it's not.
I lost 2 pounds when I quit gluten. So
yeah. Well, and that's the thing too, because I remember, like my later teenage years and things, and the gluten-free fad diet was very popular in like celebrity magazines and things. And I'm just going to come out with a hot take. I feel like a number of celebrities claimed that they had to be gluten-free for various reasons, and they were just hiding the fact that they had an eating disorder
100%
or otherwise disordered eating, because people would be like, oh, I'm so skinny now because I went gluten-free because I have a condition.
Right.
And that was like over 10 years ago now. And out of interest, I did follow up and I was like, oh, and it's like, yep, you can see them bitches eating a bagel nowadays.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, so it wasn't the gluten, it was that you were skinny and you didn't want people to ask questions because you're in the public eye, and that sucks. And I get it. But also it's like, don't say, oh, I did the gluten-free diet, because the thing.
Of a medical situation.
Right. Gluten-free diet is not a weight loss diet.
No,
it is in fact not a weight loss diet. And the majority of celiacs who are diagnosed with it, because being underweight is very characteristic of celiac disease, especially in like children and young adults, they will usually gain weight because they're malnutritioned or they have,
and they're actually absorbing now.
Yes. So it's actually more of a weight gain diet than a weight loss diet, especially if you have a medical condition. But even if you don't, just like anything else, you can be vegan and fat because sugar is vegan.
Right. Yeah.
Like, like I can eat cake for days as a gluten-free person. It just has to be gluten-free cake. Like I don't have to eat healthy on this diet. That's not a thing. And I still love junk food and comfort food. Like,
well, and that's another thing that Davis says, actually, that I was just like, you have zero idea what you're talking about. In the celiac section, he's like, a gluten-free diet can actually help you lose weight, because doesn't everyone want to lose weight? And celiacs usually lose weight. And it's like, no, motherfucker, they gain weight because they're not starving to death anymore.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah. I've read in some places, I can't recall exactly where, well, definitely anecdotally as well, but, sometimes people who are underweight diagnosed with celiac go gluten-free, they'll gain weight. And sometimes there are people who are overweight diagnosed with celiac disease, and that helps them bring them to a normal weight. Or in my case, you just kind of stay thick, and that's all good too.
Right.
But it's, although I will say the idea, this misconception of a celiac as a skinny person, that is something that also affects the ability of people to get diagnosed with this.
Sure.
So there are definitely stories that I've read of people who are like, my doctor wouldn't send me for celiac testing because I'm overweight. And he said, you can't be fat and have celiac disease. And you absolutely can. I'm living proof. You can be overweight and you can have celiac disease. Like that's
not a thing.
That's not how that works. Especially in my case, before diagnosis, I was eating so much because my body was not absorbing a lot of it. It's not like it absorbed none of it, but I was starving. Like my body was starving, even though I was eating a lot. So it's really, in the past, celiacs definitely would have tended to be more skinny. We had, less access to food in a lot of cases. People more spread out, that sort of thing. But being a celiac is not being skinny. You can definitely be any size, and this still applies. But there's doctors out there too who will be like, oh no, you're too fat to be a celiac.
Yeah. Fuck.
We come in all shapes and sizes.
Yes. Well, the second author that I have that I'm going to shame is also an MD. He's a neurologist. His name is David Perlmutter, and he is a fan of Davis's work. He actually says that explicitly in his book, and he parrots a lot of the same talking points, except that he comes with an intense focus on brain health in the book Grain Brain.
Oh my god.
Yes. He appeals to some sort of Paleolithic caveman diet bullshit, but he likes to add that, cavemen didn't die of Alzheimer's and diabetes. No mention of the fact that we died from worms and smallpox and getting attacked by predators, so we didn't live long enough to get Alzheimer's, but he calls Alzheimer's diabetes type 3.
What?
And links.
Where do they get off inventing these alternative names for existing conditions? Sorry, go on.
What? He links the development of Alzheimer's to ingestion of carbs because it overloads the body with sugar. Attacking sugar again. He does
public enemy number one.
Of course. But this guy, I would say I had a lot more to say about Davis's book. Perlmutter he kind of repeats the same thing, but instead of fat, he's just talking about the brain. But I would say Perlmutter is worse as a person.
Okay.
He has research. He's also listed on the Quack Watch database. Oh
I didn't know that was a thing.
I love that exists.
Yeah, I didn't know that was a thing.
Yes.
This is amazing.
Watch.
Yes, and it doesn't just include doctors. He's on there with Dr. Oz, but also the Liver King and the food babe, Vani Hari, who we've talked about in a microdose.
We have, yes.
And he believes the conversation on autism and vaccines is ill-defined. Prior to making it big on the New York Times bestseller list in 2013 with Grain Brain, he promoted treatments such as hyperbaric oxygen therapy and intravenous glutathione, which I would say listeners should be familiar with because we talked about hyperbaric oxygen therapy in its own episode.
Yep.
And we talked about glutathione in our skin lightening episode. So he's just hitting all of the highlights.
Yeah. Wow.
He does say his book isn't for celiacs, but he argues that gluten is a silent germ and it can inflict lasting damage without your knowing it. And this is for everyone. This isn't for celiacs who are sometimes silently being attacked, but it's just everyone. He argues gluten sensitivity is more prominent than current statistics reveal. Possibly, but he's kind of arguing that everyone is sensitive to it.
Yeah.
And he poses the question, because he's just asking questions, if autism is caused by brain inflammation, could a gluten-free diet be used to treat it?
Wow.
There's just no new thought. We just keep going around and around.
Yeah. Wow.
Yes. So, while both of these books identify starch in bread as the main problem, they do attack gluten, and it's usually that they are conflating the two as well. They'll talk about starch and gluten separately, but then they'll be like, the answer is a gluten-free diet when they mean wheat-free or low carbohydrate or low GI. So, I don't know. It's just, they're dangerous. They're charlatans. Davis has put out multiple books to follow Wheat Belly. Perlmutter has put out a diet book and several other books, and he was explicitly selling supplements through the book. He was saying, go to my website and you can buy supplements.
Wow. That's...
I hate the supplement market. That's very annoying. I will say I have also had suggested to me by a couple of people that I should try digestive enzymes.
Oh, yeah, probiotics.
My
He's big on the
celiac
probiotics.
Oh, not just probiotics, but digestive enzymes. And I will say there are some legitimate medical studies where there's actual science where they are trying to find basically digestive enzymes is an all right name for it that can actually clinically help a celiac person. But we have to remember that the things that trigger celiac disease are the components of gluten. So the gluten is broken down in your body. The issue is not digesting the gluten. It's not breaking it down. So that it's funny when people recommend that to me because I'm like, So you want me to break the gluten down into smaller pieces that are the things that inflame my immune system.
Right.
Like you want me to make it
just
easier
digest
for
it
my
even
body
more
to find targets. Like, so the concept of that sort of thing that would actually clinically help a celiac person would basically have to like evaporate the friggin' gluten proteins
completely
out of existence. Like they have to be completely dissolved. They have to
just
not exist
free
in your
amino
gut.
acids.
And they don't sell that on the shelf.
No.
I will say though, these digestive enzymes that they sell, like for gluten and stuff, they're quite expensive.
I bet they are.
$20 to $50 a bottle.
No,
and
I did
people think
probiotics.
that's gonna fix all your stuff. I mean, probiotics.
They're great.
I don't take them right now. I have used them in the past. When I got diagnosed, it was kind of funny because I looked at my box and I saw that wheat was an ingredient.
Fantastic.
So
fantastic.
My probiotics, in fact, contained
made
gluten.
It worse. Yeah,
I stopped taking those.
Yeah,
gluten hides in all
cheap.
Products. They're all over the place. But yeah, there's pills, there's snake oil cures, there's all kinds of things that people feel very comfortable going into celiac spaces online and being like, oh, well, if you had this product or this product, and this is recommended by this quack. I've had people tell me, you know, any like snake oil cures will cure my celiac disease. One that I think is funny is people will give me vague advice about like, you have to heal your leaky gut and then you won't have celiac disease anymore. And it's like, I have leaky gut because I have celiac disease. Your idea of what leaky gut is some weird quack theory about your body not digesting right. Whereas mine is literally like things are not being digested and like it's actually happening.
It's literally perforating my intestines.
Yeah, like it's like, and no, me doing that, curing my gut, healing my whatever, like it's like that's not a cure. There's no cure for celiac. Like there's so many weird snake oil sales things, and they're also marketed to non-celiacs as well, and people without intolerance or sensitivity, because there is this idea because of these
that wheat bad.
Wheat is bad, gluten is bad, grains are bad, which is funny too when gluten gets lumped in with like all cereal grains. There are grains that are not gluten grains. Like we mentioned the big three and the hybrid triticale, and also oats are kind of up in the air for celiac disease. A lot of times they come into contact with gluten grains during either their growing or their processing through you know, fields being rotated a certain way or something like that. So contaminated oats or cross contact oats, that's a big thing that can trigger celiac. So you have to get certified gluten-free oats. Even in that case, there are celiacs who have a celiac response to avenine.
They have protein. I mean, they're similar proteins.
The protein that is found in oats can cause the same response just in some celiacs. But even outside of those, like we have other cereal grains. There's plenty of things out there like millet and sorghum and I don't know, amaranth. Like there are grains. There's plenty of grains that are not big, bad, scary gluten or whatever. And people will still lump all of these together. It's just like, this is a bad thing for you. Like, since when? Since these stupid books. Since these stupid books came out.
Yeah.
Well, and I will say, just so nobody accuses me of, you know, spouting bullshit, Perlmutter, I think he had to pull the supplements off of his website. I think someone found him out. So he doesn't have the supplements anymore, but he is still basically an influencer. He's still a grifter, and he mostly gets his grifting done through advertising brands like ButcherBox and Thrive Market and then having affiliate links for it. So
I don't
so
love
still
that
finding
for those
a way.
Companies.
Yeah.
Finding a way.
So,
yikes.
What are your final thoughts on all of this? I'll start with Izzy. What are your final thoughts on this?
Final thoughts are, if you're celiac, gluten is poison. If you have another gluten-related medical condition, might as well also be a poison. And if you don't have any of those, gluten is good. You don't have to reduce your gluten intake or feel bad about it, or I don't know. Sometimes people are embarrassed. They're like, tell me they're embarrassed at how much like gluten they eat. And it's like, buddy, I would be horking wheat pasta if I could. It's readily available. It's affordable. And at least in the United States, gluten grains are usually enriched in their various forms. Yeah. So you have additional vitamins and minerals. A gluten-free diet is really not something to take on lightly and without medical supervision. At the very least, getting blood work regularly done, because it can be done improperly. And you could run yourself into some kind of vitamin deficiency corner because you don't have a balanced diet, because you've taken this big source of, enriched grains out of your diet. So definitely not something to take lightly. But also, celiac disease, while not far from affecting everybody, 1% to 2% of the population, it's not uncommon. So I think it's great for people to be aware of it, and to be aware that if you have mysterious health symptoms, it might be something to look into, or, just generally blood work to rule out various diseases if you have the resources to do that. It's estimated that the majority of people with celiac disease are not diagnosed in the world.
That makes sense.
70 to 80% of celiacs are not diagnosed, is the current estimate. Obviously, there's no way to prove that, but as we test more, we're going to be finding more and more of these people. So yeah, that's it. And, just celiac disease, it's a real thing. It's serious. And yes, even a crumb, 10 milligrams of gluten a day is the threshold for a celiac. And that's spread out over the course of an entire day. It's not a lot. It's like a little pen tip of wheat flour. So that's just the end of my educational spiel here. I hope people enjoyed learning about this and that my rambling was intelligible.
Yeah, I enjoyed you coming on here and talking to us about it. Venus, what are your final thoughts?
My final thoughts are that it is such a tragedy about Jennifer Harris-Hopkins and Daniel Phoenix.
Yeah.
It's also a tragedy that Izzy had to find out this way, like through a broken bone and through all of the healing or lack thereof that you went through to find this out. But it's good that you finally got answers, and I just really appreciate you sharing your story and all of your knowledge with us. I learned so much from you, like actually
absolutely
so much. Yeah.
I'm happy to share.
I thought I had a grasp on it. Like I thought I had a grasp on celiac disease. You know what I mean? But
it really blindsided me. Like I was so surprised. I was very confident this would not be an issue for me ever. It sneaks up on you sometimes. Yeah. So I like to share my story because I think that's just, if I had not found it out, as unfortunate as it was to find out that way, who knows how bad things could have gotten, in the following years. So if it was going to happen at some point, could have been worse.
Yeah.
I guess that's
not a good way to look at it, but sure. Not a good way to look at it, but sure.
It could have been worse. Hey, at least I was, a few minutes away from a hospital, got in an ambulance pretty quick when I broke my leg, and I was able to get the testing done at this point in my life. So yeah. I'm glad that you found it educational.
And Kayla, you?
Final
thoughts?
I think it's a little bit of everything that's been said, like saying that gluten is only a poison for some, and that's important to know. I think that's the main thing, but also just it is a serious thing, I mean, I've worked in places where, as a barista, say, and I've worked in some kitchens where people didn't really take diets seriously, especially if they found them to be trendy. They would give like whole milk to the non-fat milk person. They would give caffeine to the decaf person, which I was always like, you are going to make somebody have a coronary.
Yeah,
but,
that's not okay.
Just taking it seriously. There are going to be those like trendy people out there. They're doing their own thing. We got to let them live their lives. We got to let them make their own mistakes, but we need to take people seriously if they say I can't eat gluten, and especially if they say I'm celiac. Like, this is something that could kill people, and we need to really internalize that.
Yeah, and even if they don't die right away,
right,
the harm is real.
Yes,
it's
yes,
yeah.
Well, so this is the last episode of this season. I want to thank everyone who has stuck with us for the season, stuck with us for this episode, stuck with us since episode 1. We've got a couple of you out there.
Yeah.
I want to give a special thanks to our patrons, which is Sherlock and Watson, the Ragdoll Cats, So excited that we have cats.
Yes.
Kay posts Susan, Catherine, Josh, Jay, Lula, Izzy,
Hey.
and Patrick. We do have one more microdose left for this season that will follow this episode, and then after that it's just microdoses through the summer, and we will return in the fall on the main channel. So if you want to catch us over on Patreon. We have a $2 level and a $5 level. We do movie nights over the summer, and you can catch videos of the microdoses, and that's the only way to get content over the summer unless you're just listening to the main channel on repeat, which, you know, that's cool too. I do love that. So thank you all. Stay safe. Eat bread if you can't, and definitely don't if you can't.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please like, follow, subscribe, and review us everywhere you get your podcasts.
For more Lethal Dose content, you can find us at Lethal Dose Pod on Instagram, Tumblr, and TikTok.
For an overdose of content, subscribe on Patreon for exclusive episodes and much more.
The show theme is Look Far by our dear wizard friend Fogweaver. More of their music can be found on bandcamp.com.
Lethal Dose is created, researched, produced, and edited by Kayla Woods and Venus. Stay safe, and remember,
the dose makes the poison.